Hello all, Old Geek here, and in this video I'm going to veer away from my usual topics a little. I was sorting out some of my stuff earlier and I happened upon these. I picked them up in a second-hand bookshop a few years ago and I forgot about two of them. One of them has been sat on my bedside table for a while, but I was sorting things out and I've discovered the other two. And I know I've got a few more buried up in my attic. Fighting fantasy game books. By the way, this is also an excuse to show off some Russ Nicholson art, and much of his work in these books was better than the work that he did for D&D's Fiend Folio. I don't know how much of a foothold the Fighting Fantasy series got in America, but over here in the UK, they dominated the choose-your-own-adventure market for over a decade. Most of the earlier books were written by the founders of Games Workshop, Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson. It's not the American Steve Jackson, it's a different Steve Jackson, a British one. And Livingstone and Jackson are both British, so that will have been a factor. Also, as Games Workshop was a leading outlet for all things fantasy at that time. The first book to be published back in 1982 was Warlock of FIRETOP Mountain. My copy's the one on the left, I believe, as you look at it. Mine is a 2003 reissue with a revised cover. Under the original publishers, Puffin Books, the series contained a massive 59 titles, with more books available in other offshoot series, such as Steve Jackson's own sorcery books. The end originally came in the mid-1990s. Dwindling sales were blamed on the rise of computer games. The last book in that original series was Curse of the Mummy, and that's one of the titles I have buried somewhere under the eaves of my house's roof. In 2002, Wizard Books picked up the Fighting Fantasy name and republished many of them with new cover art. A few new books were written too, adding to the line, along with a special hardcover edition of Warlock of FIRETOP Mountain. Wizard Books ended their interest in the series for the first time in 2007, having published or republished a total of 29 titles. They revitalised it all again in 2009, bringing out another 17 books, before they finally put their line to bed in 2012. Was it all over though? Well, nope. Scholastic Books, an American company, stepped in 2017. And once again we got reissues of some of the originals, along with several new titles, some of which came from new authors. Particularly interesting is the name of Rhianna Pratchett, the daughter of the late, great Terry Pratchett. Her book, Crystal of Storms, is not one that I've seen, not one I knew about until today, but having read up about it, it has piqued my interest and I do intend to track it down. In addition to the line of books, we had other media based on the series. I remember in particular 2 video games. The original Warlock of FIRETOP Mountain was available for the 8-bit home computers of the mid-1980s. I played it on my ZX Spectrum. And then Ian Livingstone's company, Eidos Interactive, published a PC and PlayStation version of the infamous DEATHTRAP Dungeon, number 6 in the original series, in 1998. I worked in tech support for Eidos at that time, and all I remember about that game is that it was a little bit buggy. I played my first Fighting Fantasy book back in 1983. It was a couple of months before I'd even heard of Dungeons and Dragons. The first book I played was the 3rd book in the original series, Forest of Doom. One of my school friends bought it and I nagged him to have a go at playing it, and I did. I'm pretty sure I died. I then went on to read a number of the Endless Quest books, mostly those written by Rose Estes. And while they were fun, I preferred the Fighting Fantasy books because they were meatier There were more entries in them, more pages. They had more replayability, a bit more variety, and you got to roll dice. Mechanics in the game were, though, extremely simple. They used 2d6, and the choices in the game were often extremely basic. Go east or go west. Open the door or ignore it. And the nature of the design of the books meant that most of them were rather linear, but they were fun. When I found my copies of these books earlier today, I played through Warlock of FIRETOP Mountain, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah, I failed, but I got to the end. I hadn't found all of the keys I needed along the way, though. So when this video is finished, I'll be playing it again to find that one last key. For those who've not played Warlock of FIRETOP Mountain, naturally, as it was the first book in the entire series, it's probably the simplest in its design. The story is extremely basic. You go into the caverns under FIRETOP Mountain in search of loot. That's it. It's an old-fashioned dungeon crawl in a game book, but that's probably what makes it memorable nowadays, because it is the original. It has those original tropes and they feel good. Later books introduced different genres to the series, and they included sci-fi, horror, superheroes, and others. And other books added some new mechanics. Nothing was ever particularly complicated, though. All the mechanics stayed very simple. Several of the books just ramped up the difficulty. One I've already mentioned, DEATHTRAP Dungeon, lives up to that title. It's Fighting Fantasy's version of Tomb of Horrors. Even the simplest monsters in there are about as tough as the ones you get at the end of Warlock of FIRETOP Mountain. It probably took me over 10, maybe 15 attempts to get to the end of DEATHTRAP Dungeon, as the route required was ultra specific. And I remember one key decision in the book being solely up to the dice. You rolled randomly which way you went at one particular point. So even if, when you had the option, you made all the right decisions and you managed to defeat all the monsters, which were tough, you still only had a 50% chance of beating the book. Having said that, though, DEATHTRAP Dungeon's follow-up, Trial of Champions, was even harder. I've never got to the end of that one. I have both of those books still, along with Citadel of Chaos, Sword of the Samurai, Talisman of Death, Curse of the Mummy, and probably my favourite of the ones that I played, and that's House of Hell. I do remember enjoying the book Creature of Havoc as well, though I think I borrowed that one from a school friend. As with the DEATHTRAP Dungeon pair of books, House of Hell, from what I remember, I've not played it in a long time, is also hellishly difficult, spot the pun, as it adds a fear mechanic. You can die due to the jump scares. It's clearly inspired by Cthulhu-esque horror. There are cultists, there are sacrifices, there are body parts bubbling away in pots. It is just crying out to be converted into a Call of Cthulhu scenario. Giving me ideas. So, it's a fairly short video, but before I go, I'm going to give you the opening section on the first entry of Warlock of FIRETOP Mountain. Hopefully this will whet your appetite. At last, your 2-day hike is over. You unsheath your sword, lay it on the ground, and sigh with relief as you lower yourself down onto the mossy rocks to sit for a moment's rest. You stretch, rub your eyes, and finally look up at FIRETOP Mountain. The very mountain itself looks menacing. The steep face in front of you looks to have been savaged by the claws of some gargantuan beast. Sharp, rocky crags jut out at unnatural angles. At the top of the mountain, you can see the eerie red colouring, probably some strange vegetation, which has given the mountain its name. Perhaps no one will ever know exactly what grows up there, as climbing the peak must surely be impossible. Your quest lies ahead of you. Across the clearing is a dark cave entrance. You pick up your sword, get to your feet and consider what dangers may lie ahead of you. But with determination, you thrust the sword home into its scabbard and approach the cave. You peer into the gloom to see dark, slimy walls with pools of water on the stone floor in front of you. The air is cold and dank. You light your lantern and step warily into the blackness. Cobwebs brush your face and you hear the scurrying of tiny feet. Rats, most likely. You set off into the cave. After a few yards, you arrive at a junction. Will you turn west, turn to 71, or east, turn to 278? So, it's been a fairly short video. I've got a book that I need to go and play. Let me know in the comments if you've ever played any of this series, or whether other lines of game books were more popular where you grew up. Give me a like and a subscribe if you want, and happy gaming!